Imagine, two of the world's greatest powers on the brink of war, warships lined up, soldiers ready to fire. The cause? A pig? No, this isn't the beginning of a joke, but the true and absurd story of the Pig War of 1859. Welcome to a historical tale so bizarre it will make you question everything you know about international diplomacy. Prepare to discover how the death of a pig nearly rewrote the history books, with an epilogue so surreal it's almost unbelievable. To understand this story, we must first travel back to 1859 to a corner of the world we would now call Pacific, the Salish Sea, off the west coast of North America. Here, amid crystal clear waters and lush forests, lies a small jewel of a land called San Juan Island. And this island, my dear friends passionate about history and the bizarre, was the bone of contention. We're not talking about just any place, but a disputed territory. On one side, we had the young and ambitious United States of America, rapidly expanding westward. On the other, majestic and then almost omnipotent Great Britain, with its empire that never saw the sunset. The problem, neither country could agree on who the true owner of San Juan Island was. The root of this dispute lies, or rather its clauses, in the Oregon Treaty of 1846. This treaty had been signed to define the border between British and American possessions in the Pacific Northwest, and stipulated that the border would follow the deepest channel separating Vancouver Island from the mainland. The problem, as often happens with documents using such vague terms, was that there were two deep channels in that area, the Haro Strait and the Rosario Strait. The United States claimed that the border ran through the Haro Strait, giving them San Juan Island. Great Britain, of course, insisted on the Rosario Strait, claiming the island for itself. This wasn't just a matter of national pride or a few extra acres of land. San Juan Island was strategically important. It dominated the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, a vital passage for trade and for access to the region's rapidly growing ports, such as Victoria on nearby Vancouver Island, which was an important British outpost. Not only that, it was rich in natural resources, including timber, and offered excellent agricultural land. The Hudson's Bay Company, a British commercial giant, had already established a trading post on the island and employed several farmers and shepherds. Meanwhile, American settlers were beginning to look longingly at that island, eager to expand and claim their share of manifest destiny. So imagine the scene: a fertile, strategically positioned island claimed by two world powers, with their settlers living side by side, but with the sword of Damocles of an undefined border hanging over their heads. The tension was palpable, a thin layer of calm hiding a seething nationalist sentiment and territorial claims. A spark, the slightest provocation, was enough to blow everything up. And as you'll discover, that spark was incredibly a pig. And here we are finally at the heart of the story, at the exact moment when a harmless farm animal decides to become the involuntary protagonist of one of the most bizarre diplomatic crises ever recorded. It's June 15th, 1859. The scene takes place in a potato field on San Juan Island. Our involuntary protagonist is Lyman Cutler, an American settler, one of those who decided to challenge fate and settle on this disputed land. Cutler, like many pioneers, had invested his hopes and hard work in his small plot of land, growing potatoes to support his family. Imagine his frustration when, on that fateful June day, he was faced with a desolate sight. His precious crop had been completely devastated. And the culprit, a pig, a black pig with a curious face and a voracious appetite, owned by a British farmer named Charles Griffin. Griffin was no ordinary colonist. He was employed by the mighty Hudson's Bay Company, which meant he had the weight of the British Empire behind him. Griffin's pig had on more than one occasion demonstrated an irresistible attraction to Cutler's potatoes, and this time it was too much. Cutler's patience had evidently reached its limit. In a moment of rage and exasperation, Lyman Cutler took out his pistol and shot the pig. A sharp blow that echoed through the trees, ending the pig's culinary career and, unbeknownst to him, triggering an international crisis of epic proportions. The cost of the pork? About $10. 10 paltry dollars, a paltry sum, even for the time, but one that would soon become the price of peace between two superpowers. Now, the issue wasn't the pig itself, but its ownership. Griffin, furious at the killing of his animal, went to Cutler to demand compensation. $10, he said, for his fine tasting pig, but Cutler, with typical pioneer spirit, flatly refused. Potatoes are worth more than a pig invading my property, he retorted. Or perhaps more likely, he didn't feel compelled to pay for the damage he had suffered. It was at this point that the situation took an unexpected turn. Had Cutler paid those $10, or had Griffin agreed to a compromise, history would never have been written. Instead, the pre-existing tension on the island, that constant territorial squabble between Americans and British, exploded like a pressure cooker. The pig incident wasn't just a neighborly dispute over an animal, it became a symbol of the dispute, a pretext for both sides to assert their claims. Griffin, having failed to obtain satisfaction from Cutler, turned to the local British authorities. Cutler, in turn, sought protection from American authorities, and so it was that a trivial agricultural squabble turned into a question of national honor and jurisdiction. The military authorities, already deployed and on high alert due to the territorial dispute, faced a dilemma: assert their sovereignty or give in for a pig. The answer, unfortunately for world peace, was the former. At this point, the story takes on the tone of an absurdist comedy, with a hint of Shakespearean drama. Imagine the two farmers arguing over a pig, and then suddenly, as if by magic, a dispute that could have ended with a handshake escalates into an escalation involving the armies of two very powerful nations. The incident involving Cutler and Griffin's pig was quickly brought to the attention of the respective military authorities, and from there, the situation escalated faster than a pig can escape from a potato patch. The news spread like wildfire, exaggerated and distorted on both sides, fueling existing hatred and suspicion. The first to move was Captain George Pickett, a character we will find again years later as a tragic figure in the American Civil War, but who here finds himself playing a decidedly more comical role. Pickett, in command of a small American garrison on the mainland, was tasked with protecting the American settlers on the island. Instead of sending a diplomat with an offer of compensation for the pig, or perhaps some escorts for Cutler, Pickett did the most military thing he could. He landed on San Juan Island with 66 men from the 9th U.S. Infantry. Their mission? To protect Cutler from arrest by British authorities and in effect to assert American jurisdiction over the island. His statement, in a decidedly martial tone, was, "Not a British man will arrest an American on this soil." Tell me if that doesn't sound like the start of a gang war. The British response, of course, was not long in coming. Governor James Douglas, head of the Vancouver colony and a man of great military and diplomatic experience, did not take Pickett's arrival well at all. Seeing the American action as a blatant violation of British sovereignty and aggression, he ordered the dispatch of naval and land forces to restore order and protect British subjects. And so, within a few days, San Juan Island transformed into a veritable potential battlefield. British warships, armed to the teeth with roaring cannons, began converging on the island. HMS Satellite, HMS Plumper, HMS Tribune, and HMS Ganges, an 84 gun ship of the line, positioned themselves menacingly off the coast of San Juan with hundreds of Royal Marines ready to land. On the other side, Pickett's men, though heavily outnumbered and armed mainly with rifles and a few light artillery pieces, dug trenches and prepared to resist, with American pride burning in every single soldier. In a short time, San Juan Island was home to some 461 American soldiers with 14 cannons and 5 British warships with over 2,000 men and 70 naval guns. That's for a pig. Tensions were sky high. With each passing day, the risk of a mistaken shot, of a misunderstanding that could trigger carnage, grew ever higher. British sailors looked at American soldiers and vice versa with dots in their eyes, fingers on their triggers, ready to defend their honor and, in the British case, the rights of a pig. The diplomatic crisis was now global. The news reached London and Washington, throwing both capitals into a panic. A war between the two most powerful nations in the world over a pig. It seemed like a farce, but the danger was real. The entire world held its breath, knowing that a conflict on this small island could have catastrophic repercussions on a global scale, involving commercial, colonial interests, and alliances. Fortunately, in the midst of this armed farce, there were men of good sense, or perhaps just men who realized how ridiculous it would be to start a world war over a pig. Although the military escalation had advanced to the point of no return, wisdom, albeit somewhat belatedly, prevailed. Governor Douglas, on the other hand, despite having overwhelming military force at his disposal, hesitated to give the order to attack. He was an experienced man, and he understood that the attack would mean war with the United States, a conflict that Great Britain, busy elsewhere in the world and with important commercial interests with the United States, did not at all desire. In particular, Rear Admiral Robert L. Baines, commander of British naval forces in the area, flatly refused to obey Douglas's orders to attack American positions. "A war between two great nations over a quarrel over a pig is ridiculous," he said, demonstrating a lucidity and sense of humor uncommon for a military man. Think about it. An admiral who refused to fire to avoid a war over a pig. Common sense sometimes finds the most unexpected paths. In Washington, news of the incident reached President James Buchanan. Realizing the enormity of the situation and the potential catastrophe, Buchanan sent General Winfield Scott, a hero of the Mexican-American War and one of the most respected American military men and diplomats of the time, to the island with the task of negotiating a peaceful solution. Scott's mission was clear: defuse the crisis at all costs. General Scott, with his experience and pragmatism, managed to broker a provisional agreement with Governor Douglas. The two sides agreed to withdraw most of their forces, maintaining only a small military garrison on each side of the island. The Americans would maintain a southern post, the British a northern one, creating a sort of armed cohabitation, pending a more permanent diplomatic resolution. The idea was simple: reduce the likelihood of an incident and make room for diplomacy. For 12 long years, the island was jointly occupied, an outpost of armed peacekeeping where soldiers from two nations that had almost declared war over a pig lived side by side, playing cards and perhaps sharing a story. But the territorial dispute over San Juan Island remained unresolved. The two powers decided it was time for an impartial decision. And here comes the final touch of bureaucratic absurdity. Instead of another military clash or endless negotiations, they opted for international arbitration. And who was chosen as arbiter to decide the fate of this disputed island over a pig? None other than Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Yes, the emperor of a distant nation, who had no direct interest in the matter, was called upon to solve the mystery of the border in the Salish Sea. In 1872, after careful analysis of maps and documents, and presumably also a good deal of puzzlement over the original cause of the dispute, Kaiser Wilhelm there issued his verdict. His decision was unequivocal: the border was to run through the Haro Strait. This meant that San Juan Island belonged without a shadow of a doubt to the United States. Thus, after 13 years of tension, joint garrisons, and an almost interminable wait, the Pig War had its official conclusion. San Juan Island became definitively American, and all this, let's remember, because a greedy pig couldn't stay away from a potato field and an American settler had a hair-trigger temper. It's a shining example of how, at times, history can take incredibly absurd turns, but also how, fortunately, common sense can prevail even in the most ridiculous situations. The Pig War of 1859 is one of those stories that seems to have come out of a comedy film, yet it really happened. It reminds us that history is not only made up of great battles and epic characters, but also of bizarre incidents, of small events that border on the grotesque and which, by a hair's breadth, fail to change the course of the world. Imagine the newspaper headlines of the time: World War impending over potato stealing pig, or Pig diplomacy, Emperor decides fate of island. They would have been laughable had there not been the real risk of a devastating conflict. This story teaches us the importance of diplomacy, even and especially when the underlying causes seem insignificant. It shows us how political tension can transform the death of an animal into a casus belli, and how the wisdom of a few can diffuse the folly of many. So next time you see a pig, think twice. It might not just be a farm animal, but a potential trigger for international crises, and above all, never underestimate the unpredictability of the events that shape our history. It's a wry reminder that sometimes peace has been saved by little more than a chuckle. If this surreal story captivated you, don't miss the next video on the channel.